Hi, Tiffany. Welcome to the Beyond Barriers podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. I've been totally counting down to our conversation because it's been such a joy getting to know you. And I can't wait for our audience to get to know you as well.
Thank you so much, Nikki. It's an honor to be part of this Beyond Barriers podcast.
Awesome. Well, let's start at the beginning. You have just such an incredible career journey and you've accomplished so much. But let's go back in time. Tell our audience about sort of a formative moment in your life that has driven you and shaped your life and career.
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess if I were to say kind of where my story begins, it begins in 1999, which is not nearly where my age actually sits, but it begins in 99 because I was going to school, I was going to college, I had to pay for it myself. So I take kind of fits and starts when I could accumulate the money to go back to school. And I had just gotten enough money to go and participate in the next semester when I had a really, really bad car accident. So I broke a ton of bones in my body, my heart stopped.
Oh,
I was in a wheelchair for several months. I was in a walker for several months after that. And what happened for me then, which I think is probably the most important baseline of my existence and my career today, is that I built this really incredible power center of gratitude. Right? And
mm,
gratitude, it to me is like the driving force of everything that you're going to do, because what stands on top of that is humility and integrity and grace. And it really helps you understand that that is the key to a worthwhile existence, to be grateful for what you have in front of you. Um, I didn't, in follow on to that, several months of recovery, I didn't go back to college. I never did. So I don't have a college degree. But I took a really unusual risk where someone said to me, hey, you like math and maybe you'd be really good on Wall Street. So I gave up everything that I had. I was in Alabama at the time, and I moved up here to live in somebody's basement. And for rent, I cleaned their house.
wow.
And yeah, it was definitely a different beginning. But what I found through all of that is that by maintaining that baseline of gratitude, I was able to be happy and enthusiastic and really curious about what the future was going to hold for me, right? Because I don't come from that.
Hmm.
I wanted to get my doctorate degree in virology, had nothing to do whatsoever with finance. And I discovered, and I live by this premise that you are only bound by the limits of your own curiosity. And so
Hmm.
for me, everything I do is asking questions. And by asking questions, I'm able to extrapolate so much information that kind of guides the direction of travel for my life and my career.
Wow. I'm speechless. That was just so inspiring. And uh, the tenacity and resilience to overcome such a huge setback and to come out of it with uh, tremendous gratitude and the life force to conquer anything in front of you really puts everything into perspective. Um, what was that like in those early days when you did not have a college degree and you're here in New York City on working on Wall Street, surrounded by people with Ivy League degrees and probably a lot of wealth and power and all of that, and the contrast with your situation at that time? What was that like for you in sort of still owning your power?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was incredibly intimidating, and I won't pretend otherwise, right? You kind of ask yourself, do I belong here? Am I going to be able to
Mhm.
make it here? Is this a place for me? Can I compete? Am I worthy of the role that I have? And of course, I started out really junior, but even that, you're not sure if that's the place where you should
Mhm.
be. And so I took a page from the book that I had when I had the car accident, and it's a pretty prevailing theme in my life, which is that you can't spend your time worrying about all these external factors because they aren't yours, right? The
Mm.
factors I have to worry about are the ones that are mine, specifically Tiffany. And so I applied the thesis of, focus on where you are and focus on what you can do and not what everyone else around you is doing, and try to be great at what you can be great at. And that,
Mhm.
that kind of means one foot in front of the other, right? I'm curious.
Mhm.
I don't have the knowledge. I don't have the background of all of these people. So what is it that Tiffany has to do to just think about how to make herself better? Right. And then,
Mhm.
along the spectrum of that, then how can I contribute more and more as I do those different things? And it really is one step, one step, one step. We spend so
Mhm.
much time focusing on the goal that we miss the
Mhm.
fact that to get to the goal, you still have to go through, 1 to 10 to get there. And so I
Right.
just, I focus on 1 to 2 and then 2 to 3. And that makes a big difference, because you can be proud of yourself. You can be proud of your accomplishments along the way in tiny steps, and then look back
Mhm.
and be really proud in its aggregate.
Yeah. And being able to keep that perspective of not um, how far you have to go, but how far you've come also helps to keep that motivation going. Because I would imagine, like many of us that were on the outside of every inner circle, when you don't have access to those privileged relationships or resources, you have to work twice as hard to go half as far. So I would imagine that that was something that you two might have struggled with, and in that the motivation to keep at it no matter what the immediate results might be is so critical.
Yes, it is. I figured that, in business, especially as women, right? In business, you're always going to face these different milestones in your career that are going to define you as an individual.
Hmm.
And I think that we're raised or we're taught to believe that the most important thing for you is to be liked.
Mm,
We strive for that, right? It's an important
yeah.
thing for us to do. We want that kind of human relationship and engagement. But the reality is that, particularly in business, liked is wonderful and it's a great thing to have, but respected actually carries so much more currency and it's so much more valuable, because to be respected by the people around you, no matter what your ability of contribution is at any given point in time, you can be respected because you're striving to learn, or you could be
Hmm.
respected, because of your efficacy. But if you focus on that, what are you going to really focus on? Well, you're going to focus on high integrity. You're going to focus on contribution. You're going to focus on team. You're going to focus on thinking outside of the box, driving with
Hmm.
curiosity. You're going to ask questions. You're going to engage people to get to the end result. The
Hmm.
outcome of that might mean that along the way, you could make some decisions that not everybody's going to like. But if you built your
Hmm.
whole world around being liked, then you didn't
Hmm.
build anything around respect. So how are you going to
Yeah.
make that journey, with people along the way for you? So I really spend a lot of time thinking about, myself and my contribution to the business in the right way, and not thinking about the need to be liked so much, because that
Hmm.
can cause you to make decisions that may not be the right ones.
Did it, how did that impact you though in moments where perhaps you made a decision that was the right thing to do, but certainly did not make you popular? It's, one thing to understand the intellectual aspect of this, but there is a part of us that feels isolated when we're kind of thrown outside of the circle, right? Because we're not
Yeah.
liked. So what helped you cope with that or overcome that?
Sure. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because that can happen to you at so many moments where you're not even making a decision. Like, you get
Mm,
promoted and then the people that were your peers are not so happy with you, and now they have
yeah.
to report into you. So how do you work through all of that? I recognize the fact I recognize the fact that that's a real possibility anytime you make a decision that is a difficult decision to make. And I recognize that anytime that you may take on more responsibility that impacts other people. But the truth is that as you're making decisions and you're thinking about the business, I'm not thinking about them just in the context of the 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 people that
Mhm,
I like and that like me.
mhm,
Thinking about it in the context of my responsibility to the entire organization and all of the people with whom I work with, that any
mhm,
decision I might make directly or indirectly impacts them. So my model is typically to say, okay, these are the risks that I want to take, but what is the risk to not taking them? So what is the risk
mm,
of status quo? And when you start working through those things and really unpacking, what it is that you're trying to achieve and why this is the direction that you need to take, you can get a lot
mhm,
more comfortable with the fact that you might have some unfriendly impact.
mhm.
But over time, your belief says the broader impact to the business is going to be more powerful. And hopefully, when that bears itself out, I'll have the respect from the crew that didn't like that first decision, and they can come along the journey. The
Yeah,
journey.
that's a fantastic framework that I think people listening to this episode would really find valuable in implementing, because we often hear, particularly from women that we work with, about this fear of rejection, the fear of doing something that makes them unpopular or hurting someone else's feelings. So avoiding the hard conversations or the tough feedback and things like that. But keeping that perspective in mind that not only are you actually not creating value for the larger organization, but you're also not earning respect by making those choices. Um, Speaking of decision making, the nature of your role and a lot of things you do entail high risk, big impact decisions. Is there a specific framework, both for business and personal, that you have found very useful in terms of thinking about decision making, and particularly about timely decisions? When we think about what helps someone advance and keep going further faster, inertia and inaction often gets in the way. It's not even doing the wrong thing, it's doing nothing that is more harmful. And part of the reason there's inaction is feeling torn about, well, should I do this or that? And then you end up doing neither. How have you navigated those kind of situations?
Yeah, so again, I'm a very curious person. So I ask a lot of questions. My mother likes to say that my first word was why. It wasn't, mom or dad. And probably everyone who works with me would say that I'm exhausting in my constant questioning, but I'm not questioning for any reason other than I'm trying to understand and see as much as I can of the landscape, in partnership with my colleagues and my peers to kind of drive the best outcome that you can have. Because you can get to the same place a lot of different ways. We're just looking for the most efficient and most effective way. But you're right. I mean, the challenge with inertia is that status quo is not going to work, or else you wouldn't even be questioning the opportunity to do something different because something's gone sideways. And the fear that we always have is that we're going to fail, right? And so oftentimes it's the fear of failure that actually creates the inability for us to move forward. And I think that that's a limiting belief, because you have a fear in that, and then you self-limit by saying, well, this is going to fail, so I'm not 100% sure in that. And I feel like whatever belief system you have becomes true at the point at which you stop challenging it. And that's where you kind of set your line of, well, this is now the belief system that I have. And I think the way that you continue to move forward is to recognize the fact that you don't have to build Rome in a day, right? The idea behind I'm trying to get here is baby steps. I was a mountaineer many years ago, before I had kids, right? And the thing about mountaineering is that okay, I'm trying to go 4 vertical miles into the sky over a period of a couple of weeks, right? So that's your goal. But if you think about that goal all the time, you're going to miss a ton of things along the way. You could fall off the mountain. A lot of things can happen, and you're going to get to this point, which is very much like the complexity and the fear around decision making. You're going to get to this inflection point where every step, and I sometimes wonder why I used to do this, but where every step is painful, it's uncomfortable, you can't breathe, and your mind, right? And this is where we all go sideways. The power of our mind is telling us you can't do it. There's no answer. You can't do it. Stop. But then you have another voice that says, one more step.
One more step.
One more step, right? And that's the challenge. Curious, like, can I do it? Can I take one more step? What is within me? And that's, the race is long, and in the end, it's with yourself. So if you take that concept and you apply it to business, and you talk about taking risks, well, the risk isn't this second. The risk bears itself out over time. So you don't have to have all the answers today. What you have to say is, we need to go there. And I think, if I take step 1, I'm going to be on the pathway to there. And then the question you ask is, how am I going to measure whether or not that's effective? And then all you do is just wrap the measurement around step 1, and then you have step 2, and then you have step 3. And that's kind of the way, that we get there. Like, every once in a while, I do a massive change. It can happen. I don't like to use the word change. I like to use the word evolution. It's more comfortable for people, because change is scary, but evolution is just the next step of what I've already done. And listen, there's never a moment where I walk out of something thinking I have nailed this. You always go back to the basis of, did I get it right? What did I do? I think it's healthy. It's healthy to have fears, right? You have fears, you have compassion. If you have compassion, you're a good leader and you're a good partner. So, never discount all of those things, because they're amazing drivers.
Well, the voice you described, right? The voice on one side that says, you can't do it, you don't have it in you, you're too tired, what if you fail? And then there's the other voice that says, all it is just one tiny little baby step, and you've already done that, so you can do it again. really sort of describes that moment of self-doubt that we face so often. And one of the questions that we ask for our members that are joining the Beyond Barriers Accelerator at the start of the experience, one of the questions we ask them is, what are you looking to shed, during this journey? And almost 100% of the time, and this is globally across every industry, every career stage, we hear the same exact answer: self-doubt. And this is from incredibly successful, high-performing women that have achieved a lot. And this is from campus all the way to the C-suite, and we get the same answer. And on one hand, it's sort of like, okay, well, we know that's the problem, so you can solve it. On the other hand, it's incredibly sad that despite all the achievements, that is the dark cloud that's still hanging over people's heads. What, in the way you have approached some pretty daunting circumstances, clearly there might have been many moments where you too faced self-doubt.
Sure.
What has helped you sort of turn off that voice and leverage a different one? Because it's in the moment that you have to do something, because otherwise it's just there and you get inertia due to it.
I reframe it. So, I have self-doubt all the time, but the way that I tend to think about it is I'm doubting the direction I'm going. So maybe what it means is I need to ask a few more questions to get more comfortable with what I'm thinking. And so, life is, you go through that study that talks to you about what you know, right? And there's what you know, and it's super tiny. And there's what you don't know, and it's super tiny. And then there's what you don't know, and that is massive. So I realize that I am always solving for what I don't know. And that's the pool, the dark pool that makes us self-doubt. Because if we knew, we would have no doubt, right? And so all you're trying to do is pick up a few more, inches inside of that, what you don't know, so that you can get a little bit more comfortable with more information to go the direction that you want to go. I also know that, like, I'm not everything, right? I have strengths and I have weaknesses, and that's okay. And I can go to lots of people and be really vulnerable about what my weaknesses are. And their strengths will complement what my strength is. And then maybe we get an even more informed picture. I'm not an island. I'm doing this with a lot of people. And the more people I can socialize something with and get their perspective on it, doesn't mean I'm going to agree, doesn't mean I'm going to do it, but knowledge is power. So my view is that the more knowledge I gain, the more curious I am, the more I ask who, what, when, where, why, and how, the more comfortable I can be in the direction that I want to go to the best of my ability. But we have to stop believing as women that in order for us to feel like we have permission to succeed, in order for us to feel like we can be a success, that we have to know everything and eradicate doubt. Doubt is healthy because doubt makes us strive to do better. And so I think we need to reframe that for ourselves and not make it a weakness, but my God, make it a strength.
Yeah. When in doubt, get curious.
That's right. When in doubt, get curious. That's right. Perfect line. When in doubt, get curious. Love it.
Yeah, because it just tells you there's something more you need to discover. And if you get curious, you'll figure it out, or you'll find the person with the answers. You don't have to have the answers yourself, but you'll figure
100%.
out a way forward. So, as someone who's a highly accomplished leader, and having built great teams, what are some of the attributes that you particularly look for that has been sort of your formula, if you will? It's not about what you see on the resume or past experience or all the fancy brand names that they've worked with, but you must have something that is the X factor that you look for. What is that?
That is an excellent question. I think that the way that so you're right. I actually don't look at college education. I don't look at where you worked at before. I'm looking at you because I'm an investment. So past performance is not indicative of future results. And if I do that, I actually limit you in my own mind. So those things are not really important to me. What's important to me is figuring out, if I'm bringing you into a team, if I'm bringing you, as a report into my teams, what is it that you have that I don't have in the other people within the group? And so where are you going to add and start, filling in that circle of what the business is? We can teach you stuff, right? That's the easy to teach you. But what do you have that is uniquely yours? So incidentally, I've had a situation where I hired somebody who was incredibly negative about everything. And on the surface of that, you think, why in the heck would you actually do that? But the truth is that sometimes you need to have somebody who tells you that it's not going to work and it's never going to work, because that becomes your guiding light of what are they seeing that I'm not seeing, and how important
Mm,
is that. And when you understand and you can explain to a group the value proposition of having someone who doesn't just jump on board all the time and drink your Kool-Aid, it
hmm
really helps you check your premise and check your gut to go the right way directionally. So I look for someone to have a spark of enthusiasm, even if you're enthusiastic to say it won't work, or you're enthusiastic that it will. There's a lot of different ways where you can, harness the
Yeah.
power of what lights somebody up. And
Yeah.
I do think that one of the things that is really important for me as a person, as well as for teams, is to pay attention to micro moments. And so
Mm,
what do I mean by a micro moment? So, oftentimes we have an incredible passion for something. And if you're passionate about something, usually it's going to become your strength, but you don't understand how it can translate into different aspects of your life. And that translation is really, really, really important. So if you think about the fact that, I wanted to be a scientist, by virtue of that, what do I love? I love research. So I
mm,
love research, and I love to think, if something can be challenged, can it be done differently? Can you solve a puzzle, right? I like to solve puzzles. Well, you can pull that into anything, right? You
yeah.
just have to figure out how to find it. And so I pay a lot of attention to people around when no one is looking, when do they go that extra mile, and what was it, and what was the spark in it that actually set that off? Because you can harness the power of that within a group
hmm
and really carry it forward. And I did it from my own career, right? I'm very
hmm
curious because of what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so that curiosity drives me to build businesses and find solutions and challenge the status quo. And so I think we as people need to pay much more attention, and women in particular, because we oftentimes let the outside world define us. You've got to define you,
Mm,
and you find your micro moment,
yeah.
build off of that, you'll have success.
Wow, there's so much goodness packed into that one response. I want to unpack a few things that I think will be great call outs for our audience. So, uh, first off, it sounds like as if you're a leader who's thinking about building this high performing team, think of it in terms of the diversity that makes the collective more powerful and effective. So, even in your example, Tiffany, about someone who may be very negative, but they're adding a level of perspective that over optimism might miss out on.
Yeah.
So diversity really matters, and that kind of diversity of perspectives really matters. I've often thought of it like a great team is like casting in a movie. You want to figure out like the different characters and different styles and things like that. But ultimately, it's about what unlocks that magic that becomes unstoppable. Um, the other thing you called out was the micro moments. And it's a little bit like if you pay attention to the habits, you're going to know what kind of result is bound to come, but they're also transferable, right? So if you are someone who loves to solve problems, or you love to work with people and help them, there might be different applications of that. And instead of feeling siloed to say, well, this is the only industry I know, this is the only job type I've had, you might be surprised of how you can take the things you've done and that are natural passions, curiosity, and strengths, and apply it in a whole different context and get terrific results. But being able to identify that is the self-awareness we must have. But from there comes a challenge, Tiffany, that we often observe is communicating your value. It's one thing to know it, but the struggle of not knowing how to articulate your unique value proposition and to really own it in a way where you're not just introducing yourself as a, hey, this is my name and this is my title. How can you actually describe what you really do and the value you bring to the table? What guidance would you give to people when they're struggling with that, and why it's so critical?
Yeah, I think in the first instance, you have to know yourself, right? Know
Hmm
yourself, and know yourself incredibly well. That's the
hmm
key, right? The person you spend the most time with in your life is you.
Yeah.
And so no one's going to know you better than you. And the reason I say that's really important is because if you know yourself, if you can root yourself as a tree, and actually sometimes when I'm going into meetings, I visualize being a rooted tree around what I need to talk about and what I need to do, and then kind of palm trees because they're flexible because the wind is going to blow you around. But I do think that if you can root yourself in what you are and what you are not, and that's also a really important part of that. And you can identify what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, but you really own your strengths and those weaknesses, you will communicate that way naturally, because your natural
Mm-hmm.
default is going to be to where you're strong. But if you're unsure,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure your communication is going to be one where you're seeking acceptance, you're seeking approval, and you're seeking someone to tell you what you're good at. But when you're confident and you know,
Mm-hmm.
that just comes from you. It exudes from you, and it exudes with passion, because you're going to have
Mm-hmm.
more opinions about things, because you're going to know what your strength is. You're going to have
Mm-hmm.
more ideas around execution or challenging the status quo, or even creating, greater efficiencies or symmetry, whatever it could be, right? You're going to automatically do it because you know it's a skill set that you have. And then people are going
Mm-hmm.
to be able to understand that. It's quite hard to walk into a room and walk up to someone and sort of, outline your value proposition when you have when you're not actually putting it in the context of what the value
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yeah.
But I have seen and I have met with some incredible people in my career where I understood immediately what was valuable because they started talking in a certain way, and I was able to pull it out and say, oh, that's really incredible, right? They have a real vision on that.
Yeah.
And then you think about that. So again, I think the key to that is understanding that you have to define you, and you cannot let other people define you. And don't be afraid to be proud
Yeah.
of your strengths. Like, we're taught to be humble, and humility should always exist within you, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that you can't highlight your strengths and be comfortable leaning into them. There's a big difference between owning that and being arrogant.
Yeah.
There's a gap,
Absolutely.
massive.
Yeah. Yeah, simply advocating for yourself or communicating your value does not make you arrogant or egotistical. It is simply expressing how you can actually help other people.
Yeah,
Much like a brand, if you're able to express, this is what I'm great at doing that is going to create value for you, it's not about, being bragging about yourself. It's actually telling other people how they can,
no,
what value you provide for them.
that's right. And you think of it as an executive of a firm, when somebody walks up to me and says, hey, they introduce themselves, we're talking a little bit about what they do, and they say, hey, I was thinking about, this thing that we're trying to solve for, and I had this idea around X. You're telling me
Mhm.
right there what your value is. You don't have to tell me
Mhm.
your value with a word. You're telling
Yeah.
me because you've thought about something. You are adding value to my time and to the business and for yourself. So now
Yeah.
I know how to frame you, and that's really the way to do it. You
Yeah.
can tell your story in the idea of execution.
Yeah. Speaking of adding value to other people, it's also the foundation of how great relationships are built, right? You give before you think about taking. And if you just focus on giving, it all works out and builds really authentic relationships. As someone whose career, I'm sure, has been impacted by powerful relationships, and it's, sort of the world you live in, um, what specific tangible techniques or recommendations would you have for someone, particularly more early stage? When you're early stage, you don't have the benefit of years of experience in the workforce that you've built this network and all of that. And there's also a level of fear and intimidation about, well, how can I reach out to someone high up there? What would I have to say to them? How did you do that early in your career, or what would you guide someone to do now?
Yeah, so I have I have no sense of hierarchy. It's not the way that I operate. And probably the reason for that is because my whole guiding principle is curiosity. So I'm asking
Hmm.
questions. I'm curious. I don't really
Yeah.
think about it in the context of who you are versus who I am. I'm just trying to get
Yeah.
information. So I don't think of it that way. But what I would say is that, first of all, never, ever have fear about speaking to somebody more senior within an organization, because our job over time is to figure out who the next leaders are within an organization. And
Yeah.
we can't do that if we don't engage with you. Like, that's mission critical to our ambition,
Yeah.
in the first instance. And the second, we're always seeking people that can grow within the business. And if we don't get to know you, we don't get to do that.
Yeah.
But it is intimidating to reach out, but just reach out. People love to be asked questions. I like to ask a lot of questions because I'm curious,
Yeah.
but people love to be asked questions as well about, how did you get where you got? What does your career look like? What is your business like? I don't understand this. Can I have some time to learn about it? It is our responsibility. It's our imperative as
Hmm.
leaders of a business to engage with everybody within an organization, because all people have value. All people, don't care
Yeah.
what you do in a company. The company will not be as successful if the role that you're in isn't occupied, else the role wouldn't exist. And so, I think being comfortable You can be nervous. We totally expect that that's going to happen, right? You can be nervous, but be unafraid and unabashed about asking questions. Let us know that you're there.
Yeah.
Let us know that you're curious. Let us know that you want to grow and that you have an ambition. There is nothing
Yeah.
wrong with
Yeah.
that. You know,
Yeah.
what's the
Yeah.
worst that's going to happen? The
So,
worst that's going to happen is your fear that we're going to walk out thinking that was a waste of my time, or that has never happened in my entire career. I have
yeah.
never walked out of a meeting with anybody saying that was a waste. It's never happened.
Yeah.
I'm always learning something.
Well, and it's also, people love sharing their own stories and talking about and imparting the wisdom. It's a way we pay it forward. So,
Of course.
if you're early in your career and you're asking someone senior about their experience or their guidance,
Yep.
it's something they love doing anyway.
Sure.
And the worst case, they're busy in the moment and might say, "I can't do it right now, but can we do it another time?" And
Absolutely.
that's great too. So, but
Another
you
great,
don't ask, you don't get.
you don't ask, you don't get. I mean, and even you could be struggling with, a challenge in the office, around something that you're working on, and you could
Mhm.
ask how we've solved other problems or what would our guidance be. You're right. People love to impart wisdom,
Yeah,
or what we
absolutely.
perceive to be wisdom that may not be our thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. With so much that you have on your plate and a busy career and as a mom, how do you stay grounded? How do you, what makes it work for you? Because there's no specific formula for everybody, but what's your philosophy of making it work for you?
Yeah, so I stay grounded by remembering what I come from. I come from
Mm,
very humble beginnings. I had a couple of challenges along the way. And I also remember that I started in this business the same way everybody else who's coming up in this business started, period. We all came through the same doors. We had the same fears. We had the same challenges. I remember that every single day.
mm,
Um, I spend a lot of time trying to be on the other side of the conversation. So when someone's talking to me, I want to get in their shoes. I want to do the best I can to perceive what they see, perceive how they're feeling, perceive how they're taking something in, because perception is truth to the perceiver. So for us to, fix things or solve things going forward, I kind of have an obligation to do that. But it keeps me compassionate, right? It keeps me
mm,
in the right place.
yeah.
um, in terms of balancing life and work with my kids. I think of it as work life integration. I have the luxury of working for a firm that understands probably the most important thing that we should all remember, which is that people are the ethical and timeless imperative. And so they really embrace family, and
Hmm.
that family comes first, because if you're not taking care of that, then you're not bringing your A game to the
Hmm.
business. And
Yeah.
so I definitely have the luxury of being able to do that. I practice a lot of thankfulness. Listen, when I get home and I'm with my family, my phone is off. That's it. So when they go to bed, then I can get back online and I can do all of that. But focused couple of hours is worth more than 14 hours not focused. And so
Hmm.
I really make that a practice to get it right. Do I think I get it right all the time? Absolutely not. Do I feel guilty? Quite often, every single day. And then I try to remind myself that you do the best you can with what you have. And if you're lucky and you can think about your life in a different way, then it's about all the things you achieve in the arc of your life, not what you're achieving in the moment of your life. And I have talked about this
Mm,
before, which is that we want to have it all. We want to be the best, right? We want to be the best of everything. And you can be,
mhm,
but not all at the same time. So you really
mm.
have to figure out how to embrace and have compassion for yourself and be grateful for your journey, and integrate that into your life the right way. That's really important.
Yeah. I love your point about self-compassion. It's patience and forgiveness and grace that we afford other people, but often forget to do it for ourselves.
That's
And the
exactly
negative self-talk and the berating yourself for dropping the ball or not being there for someone else or, not having enough energy and all of that. If we simply start and end each day with compassion and patience,
yeah.
we would live healthier lives.
It sets you up for
Um,
the next day for sure.
yeah. Um, you talked a lot about curiosity and how it's been such a driving force throughout your life. What are you most curious about when you look way out into the future? What is it about the future that is most captivating your curiosity right now?
In the context of my business or everything.
In
I'm curious.
general.
There's no end to where I am curious. I think probably, well, listen, a lot of different things, right? I think a lot about, the arc of our business and are we going to achieve our ambition and is the ambition the right one? And whether or not we're positioned that way correctly. I think a lot about our political landscape and what does that actually look like. I think a lot about our economic landscape and what does that look like and what outcomes do I think, could actually, come to bear based on where we are in sort of a cycle. It's important for us to think about that stuff, geopolitical issues,
Mhm.
macroeconomic factors, all of those things are really important. There is not one thing well, there's not really one thing out there that would necessarily stand out more than the other because they're all interconnected, right? All of
Yeah.
the things that I try to think about are interconnected, but I'm interested, right? I'm interested in history and history repeats itself. So sort of where are we in the cycle of history
Mhm.
repetition and what do those outcomes look like? And then how do I think about planning for those outcomes, what do those outcomes mean to me as an individual, us as a society,
Mhm.
in that framework. I think about that stuff a lot. And then of course I have to, because in the context of what I do,
Yeah.
those things matter.
And it's so powerful when we create space for ourselves to zoom in and zoom out,
Yeah.
and the patterns we're able to see and the trends we're able to forecast open up opportunities, both personal and business, in ways we might have missed out on. And being able to do both, like doing a great job at what you're doing right now, but also running another race and being able to zoom out and look backward, forward, and around you.
I think that's right. I mean, I think it's easy to discount that thinking is a muscle. And
Hmm.
so the more you try to explore different things and understand different things and break down systems and reconstruct them and figure out, the end of a movie, for example, the more you do that, the more you learn. And the more you learn,
Yeah.
the more you build on your ability to actually achieve, goals that you may set for
Yeah.
yourself in your career personally.
Yeah. Well, I hope that's a practice that people listening are able to incorporate in their lives. And I always recommend, people create actual time on the calendar for think time, because,
Yeah.
like you said, it's not a muscle. But in order for it to become a muscle, like anything else in our lives, you got to invest time in it, and you can't invest time if it's not on your calendar, and it's just something you think you'll get to somehow.
That's right.
But that discipline, just like writing or speaking and all of that, if you have the discipline of think time and you ponder over questions that may not cross your mind in everyday work, illuminates your perspective in ways that create value all around.
That's right.
All
I,
right, well, let's get to the lightning round.
oh yeah.
This is going to be fun. So I've got 5 questions to ask you, and we'll go through them in rapid fire. So the first question is, what book has greatly influenced you?
Oh,
Or what book for you?
I read some weird books, but probably my favorite book, and I would probably say it influenced me is it's going to sound like a crazy one, but it's called The Coming Plague. And The Coming Plague is 1,000 pages of the history of viruses, which would make sense given where I started with what I
Yeah.
wanted to do. And it kind of goes through what they did and then how they went out and how they solved for it and they found a cure. And it's really incredible. Um, and the reason it's incredible to me is not because it's necessarily specific to viruses, although I love that, but because it teaches you how to think with a research-oriented mind, right? Like how did they have the patience? What did they look for? How did they know to keep testing these hypotheses to get to an end objective? And that can really help you learn how to think in
Right.
a different way, even though it's a strange, potentially a strange book.
It's a great example of micro moments, though,
Yeah,
right? It's
totally.
problem solving, it's breaking down problems, hypothesis testing, and
Yeah.
researching. That's great. It's a perfect example of what you're doing and what you're built for.
Right.
What's your favorite inspiring quote or saying?
Yeah, the one I use most frequently comes from a country and western song, and it's sometimes you're the windshield and sometimes you're the bug. Pretty self-explanatory, but I like it because sometimes you're ahead and sometimes you're behind, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, love that. I never heard that one
Yeah.
before. That's really cool.
Listen to more country music.
Yeah. What is one word you'd use to describe yourself?
Honest.
Mm, love that. It's beautiful. What is a change, whether it's a habit or an action, something that you implemented that made your life better?
Yeah, I think active listening.
Mm,
And active listening has been really important because it allows me to stop thinking about what I'm trying to achieve in a discussion and really understand what the person on the other side of me is trying to say. And that actually helps me fill the what I don't know bucket, and
mhm,
keeps it real, allows me to integrate different perspectives. And again, gives you a real framework for compassion and humility and grace and partnership and better
mm,
communication. It was probably the single most important thing I have ever done.
no. Um, I think it's so evident from our conversation, your active listening skills and your ability to be really present, and the power it has on charisma. We often think charisma is how you show up and what you say, but it's actually how we show up for others and how we actively listen to them and make them feel heard.
Yeah, I think
Mm.
that's right.
All right. So, last question. What power song would you want playing as you walk out onto a stage?
Oh, wow. Probably Rise Up by Andra Day. I really like that one because you're going to face adversity and you got to get up and you got to
Yeah.
get up and you got to move. So,
Yeah. It's true to your brand, Tiffany. True to
true to
your
my
brand.
brand. That's right.
I love that.
I kept it
Totally
a
on
common
point.
theme.
Yeah. I love this. Well, this has been an absolute delight and honor. There's so much inspiration and wisdom and actionable strategies packed in this episode. I cannot wait for audience to listen, learn, and most importantly, apply it. And we'll be sharing all of this content across the board. So thank you for taking the time to do this interview. And we're celebrating your successes, and we'll continue to cheer you on. It was great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Nikki, for having me.